conscientiousness is consistently one of the best predictors of any type of success. Conscientiousness is really about how able you are to motivate yourself. So people who are highly conscientious have long-term goals, they've got strong objectives, they know what they want to do, and they can get themselves to do it. And they can do it without any encouragement, without any external motivation, without any help. They just get it done. The more conscientious someone is, the more they tend to plan things, the more long-term planning they do, the better organized they tend to be, the more they focus on kind of schedules, priorities, outcomes, focusing on what is the objective today, what is it next week, what is it next month, what is it next year. And conscientiousness is that combination of long-term planning, of achievement orientation, and conscientiousness at work especially tends to be focused on outcomes. So people who are very conscientious, highly conscientious, have high scores on conscientiousness, tend to have an objective in mind, they know what they want to do, and they know how to get it done, and they will. And that's the important thing about conscientiousness, especially at leadership, is it's critical. For leadership, you need to be conscientious. You need to be able to manage yourself, you need to potentially be able to manage other people's schedules, you need to be thinking about company priorities, your own priorities, personal objectives, what other people are thinking of, and manage all of this information in a very kind of proactive way and a very organized way. Organization is part of it too. Lower conscientiousness is not necessarily a bad thing. And particularly in people who have lower conscientiousness, who have found kind of jobs or careers that really fit with them, they will tell you absolutely over and above it's perfect for them. So people who are low conscientiousness might say they're more adaptable, they're more spontaneous, they roll with the punches, they can adapt to difficulty, things don't bother them so much, they can get up in the morning and they never know what is going to surprise them or what amazing thing is going to happen that day. And that's good in some careers. So we find marketing, communications people tend to be much lower conscientiousness because they're better at adapting to things. But if something happens, if a crisis happens, they can adapt to it, they jump on it. And it's about what motivates people. So people with higher conscientiousness tend to be motivated more by the long-term plan, more by their goals, their personal objectives, and they tend to be more focused on that. Whereas people with lower conscientiousness tend to be motivated by the situation, by the environment, by what's going on around them. So that's one of the reasons that people with higher conscientiousness make very good leaders, is because you need to be thinking about the company vision, about the company priorities, about profits, about what's going on around you, and all of these different things and how that fits into the long-term plan. The limitation of that is sometimes long-term planning and sometimes a long-term kind of orientation, looking further down the road, can blind people to the opportunities or the situations that are going on around them. So it's really useful to have people with lower conscientiousness who can seize opportunities and who are distracted by what's going on around them because they're completely aware of that. They're motivated by what's happening right now or demotivated by what's going on right now. So people with lower conscientiousness can sometimes seem more difficult to motivate because they can't motivate themselves. They need something going on, they need a spark, they need excitement, they need something inspirational or something exciting to happen. We see this a lot in more artistic, more creative profiles, is they tend to have lower conscientiousness, sometimes substantially lower conscientiousness, but they're very good at picking up on what's going around them and very good at being inspired by something in the moment. And they'll work tirelessly. Someone with low conscientiousness can work just as long a day as someone with higher conscientiousness, but they need a reason, they need a circumstance, they need something going on around them. And this tends to be true of people who are motivated by the last-minute deadline too, is people with lower conscientiousness are not necessarily thinking about the long-term plan, they're not thinking about what they're going to have to do in a very scheduled, rigorous, controlled way over the next, 2, 6, 8 weeks, whatever. But then a deadline comes around, and that's what motivates them. So conscientiousness isn't just the most important trait for leadership, it's the most important trait for most jobs, most occupations, most levels of achievement. And if you want someone who is career-oriented, driven, focused, and that is their priority, conscientiousness is probably what you want. People with lower conscientiousness will tend to tell you they don't care so much. And it's not necessarily that they don't care about their career, or that people who have lower conscientiousness can't be very good performers if that's their priority, that's their goal. But people with lower conscientiousness sometimes are inspired by different things. or they're more interested in their hobbies, they're more interested in their family, they're more interested in having fun outside of work. But in some cases, people with lower conscientiousness don't care so much about work. And they're motivated by deadlines, so when something has to happen, they'll get it done if they're good, if they know what they're talking about, if they're clever enough to do their job. But sometimes it's just a smaller part of life. And sometimes people with lower conscientiousness are completely able to do the job if they fit in their role, if they're well managed, if they have a supervisor who knows how to motivate them and knows that they're motivated by, a deadline or an exciting situation, or that is the way that they're going to do their best work, then that's fine. But the increased level of responsibility, the increased job difficulties, greater job demands, putting people in a role where they need to not only organize and manage themselves, but manage other people, can be a problem for people with lower conscientiousness. The thing to remember, especially about conscientiousness, and especially when you're debriefing people, is that there's no right and wrong trait. And so a strength in one way, for example, high conscientiousness in a leadership role, is absolutely essential. But it's not necessarily a strength in other areas. So people who are very good at long-term planning, about motivating themselves, about focusing on something over a long period of time with an intended result, are definitely who you want as managers. They're definitely who you want as leaders. They tend to be more successful in education, in school, they tend to get better marks, but it's not necessarily always a strength. And it's not a strength if it goes to the extreme. So conscientiousness, at its highest point, can also be perfectionism. It can be rigidity, it can be being very blinded by what the long-term goal is and missing things that are going on around. You need people who have long-term thinking, especially in a leadership position, but you also need people who can react to crises, who can seize opportunities, who realize what's going on around them, and who know how to react to that, and who like reacting to that. So it's great to have a leader who has a long-term plan, who has a long-term focus, but it's not necessarily good to have them managing the marketing strategy or controlling the Twitter account. And when you're debriefing, and conscientiousness is the one that tends to get the most resistance because it's difficult to tell people they have low conscientiousness. And a lot of people don't like to hear it. People who are self-aware have no problem, and they know the strength of their own personality trait because they are more spontaneous, they have more fun, they don't focus too much on work, they can shut work off when they leave because they're not there. And because we're talking about a leadership profile, this optimal zone, this conscientiousness is essential. But in most careers and a lot of jobs, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And that's a good example going forward with the rest of the personality traits. Both looking at optimal traits, but looking at the effects of different levels of traits. So not necessarily bad or good in your life in general, in work. There are some that are slightly preferred, but if you have different levels of traits that are not optimal for leadership, for example, you might be better suited to a different type of work.